The gavel slammed, and the courtroom fell silent. But Ethan's heart thundered like a trapped bird. At 17, he stood in the defendant's box, accused of a crime he didn't commit, his hazel eyes scanning the faces of strangers who judged him before he spoke. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, was fighting for the right to be himself in a world that seemed determined to break him. Chicago's summer heat clung to the air, even inside the courtroom, where the air conditioning wheezed in defeat. Ethan Carter, barely a senior in high school, felt the weight of every stare. His faded jeans and worn-out hoodie marked him as an outsider in this sea of polished suits. He was here because of a single night, a night that started with a rainbow flag and ended in blood. It was June, Pride Month, and Ethan had been at the heart of Boys Town, Chicago's vibrant gay neighborhood. He'd gone to the parade with his best friend, Mia, a 16-year-old with a penchant for dyeing her hair every color of the spectrum. They danced under a shower of confetti, Ethan's laughter mingling with the crowds as he waved a small rainbow flag. For the first time, he felt free, not just a kid from a rough South Side neighborhood, but a young man who could love who he wanted without shame. That freedom didn't last. A group of older teens, led by a hulking figure named Derek, had spotted Ethan and Mia. Derek, 19, with a buzz cut and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face, was the kind of guy who thrived on making others feel small. Faggots, he'd spat, ripping the flag from Ethan's hands and tearing it to shreds. The crowd had parted, some shouting, others frozen. Ethan, fueled by a mix of fear and defiance, shoved Derek back. It was a mistake. Derek's fist met Ethan's jaw, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. Blood pooled under his cheek as Mia screamed for help. But the story didn't end there. Derek's crew scattered when the police arrived, and somehow, Ethan was the one cuffed, accused of starting the fight. Derek, the son of a well-connected local businessman, spun a tale that painted Ethan as the aggressor. The truth was buried under influence and lies, and now Ethan faced charges of assault and public disturbance. In the courtroom, Claire Donovan, the prosecutor, paced like a predator. 38. She was a rising star in the DA's office, known for her ruthless efficiency. Her sharp gray suit matched her sharper tongue, and she wielded both with precision. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "You expect us to believe you were just an innocent bystander. Kid like you, running around with a rainbow flag, looking for trouble." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to scream that he hadn't started it, that he'd only wanted to celebrate who he was. But his public defender, a frazzled man named Tom with a tie that never sat straight, barely had time to prepare. "Just tell the truth," Tom had whispered before the trial. But the truth felt like a fragile thread in a storm. Claire's questions came like bullets. "So, you admit you pushed Derek first? You provoked him?" She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Isn't it true you were angry, maybe even looking for a fight?" The courtroom murmured, and Ethan felt the weight of their judgment. He was a gay kid from the wrong side of town, easy to villainize. Mia sat in the gallery, her blue-streaked hair a beacon of support. She tried to tell the police what happened, but her voice was drowned out by Derek's father's influence. Ethan's own father, James, was there too, his broad shoulders hunched in the back row. James Carter, 45, was a construction worker with hands calloused from years of labor. He and Ethan hadn't spoken much since Ethan came out 2 years ago. James hadn't thrown him out, but the silence between them was its own kind of exile. As Claire mocked Ethan's story, painting him as a reckless troublemaker, something in James shifted. He'd been quiet, his face a mask of stoicism, but his eyes followed every word. Ethan caught his father's gaze for a fleeting moment, and for the first time in years, he saw something there, not anger, not disappointment, but a flicker of pain. The trial dragged on, with Claire hammering at Ethan's character. "You're telling me you didn't provoke this altercation? That you weren't flaunting your lifestyle?" The word stung, and Ethan's hands clenched. He wanted to tell her about the nights he'd cried himself to sleep, about the fear of being himself in a neighborhood where different was a target. But he stayed silent, his voice trapped. Mia testified next, her voice shaking but clear. Ethan didn't start it. Derek attacked him because he was holding a rainbow flag. Ethan was just trying to stand up for himself. Claire dismissed her with a wave, calling her testimony biased. The jury, a mix of stern-faced older men and women who seemed uncomfortable even hearing the word gay, scribbled notes. Ethan's hope was fading. He could see the verdict forming in their eyes, a guilty kid who didn't belong. But then the judge, a gray-haired woman named Judge Ellis, called for the next witness. "James Carter," she said, and the room stilled. James stood, his work boots scuffing the floor. He wasn't a man of words. Ethan had always known him as gruff, practical, a man who fixed problems with his hands, not his voice. But as James took the stand, something in his posture changed. He looked at Ethan, and his eyes held a weight Ethan hadn't seen before. "Mr. Carter," Claire began, her tone almost bored, "can you confirm your son's version of events?" James cleared his throat. "I wasn't there that night," he said, his voice low but steady. "But I know my son, and I know what he's been through." Claire raised an eyebrow, sensing an opening. "Oh, and what exactly has he been through, Mr. Carter? Enlighten us." The room waited. Ethan held his breath. And then James spoke, his voice breaking the silence like a hammer through glass. "I failed him," James said, his voice raw, like he was pulling the words from somewhere deep and buried. "I failed my boy when he needed me most." The courtroom froze, every eye locked on the man whose rough hands trembled as he gripped the stand. Ethan's heart stopped. His father had never spoken like this. Not to him. Not to anyone. James looked at Ethan, and for the first time, Ethan saw tears in his father's eyes. "When Ethan told me he was gay, I didn't know what to do. I grew up in a world where that wasn't. It wasn't something we talked about. I thought if I ignored it, it'd go away. I thought I was protecting him by staying quiet." He paused, his voice cracking. "But all I did was make him feel alone." The jury leaned forward, their expressions softening. Claire, for once, seemed caught off guard, her pen hovering over her notes. James continued, his words spilling out like a dam breaking. "I saw the bruises on him, not just from that night, but from years of being pushed around. Kids at school, people in our neighborhood. He never told me, but I saw, and I did nothing." Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the times he'd come home with a split lip or a black eye, brushing it off as just a fight. He'd never told James the truth, that the taunts, the shoves, the whispered slurs followed him everywhere. He thought his father didn't care. "I'm not a man who's good with words," James said, his voice steadier now. "But I know my son didn't start that fight. He's not violent. He's brave. Braver than I ever was. He went to that parade knowing people like Derek would be there, knowing they'd try to hurt him. And he went anyway, because he wanted to be proud of who he is." The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Even Claire seemed to hesitate, her usual sharpness dulled. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes, not from shame this time, but from something else, something he hadn't felt in years. His father saw him. Judge Ellis cleared her throat. Mr. Carter, can you speak to the events of the night in question? James nodded. I wasn't there, but I know Ethan. He doesn't go looking for trouble. He spent his whole life trying to avoid it. That boy, Derek's the one with a history. I heard from other parents in the neighborhood. He's been picking fights for years, especially with kids who are different. Claire stood, regaining her composure. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Sustained, Judge Ellis said, but her tone was softer, her eyes lingering on James. Stick to what you know, Mr. Carter. James nodded, but he wasn't done. What I know is this. My son's been fighting a battle I didn't understand, and I let him fight it alone. I'm here now because I won't let him face this alone anymore. Ethan's breath hitched. He wanted to run to his father, to tell him it was okay, that he understood. But he stayed rooted, his hands gripping the edge of the defendant's box. Mia, in the gallery, wiped her eyes, her rainbow bracelet glinting under the fluorescent lights. Claire tried to redirect, her voice sharp again. So, Mr. Carter, you admit you have no direct knowledge of the incident. You're just here to, what? Vouch for your son's character. I'm here to tell the truth, James said, his voice firm. And the truth is, Ethan's a good kid. He doesn't deserve this. He didn't attack anyone. He was attacked for being who he is. The jury murmured, and Ethan saw a few nod, their faces shifting from skepticism to something closer to empathy. Claire sat down, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she looked rattled. As James stepped down, he paused by Ethan's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. I'm proud of you, he whispered, so low only Ethan could hear. The words hit harder than any punch Ethan had ever taken. The trial moved forward, but the air in the room had changed. Ethan's public defender, Tom, called another witness a bystander from the parade, a 30-year-old barista named Sarah who'd seen the whole thing. Sarah's testimony corroborated Mia's. Derek had attacked first, unprovoked, targeting Ethan because of the rainbow flag. He was laughing when he hit him, Sarah said, her voice steady, like it was a game. Claire cross-examined Sarah, but her questions lacked their earlier venom. The jury was listening now, really listening. Ethan felt a spark of hope, fragile but growing. As the day ended, the judge adjourned the trial until the next morning. Ethan was led back to a holding cell, but he didn't feel as alone. James's words echoed in his mind, a lifeline in the chaos. Outside, the Chicago skyline glowed under a setting sun, and Ethan allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that he might make it through this. But the fight wasn't over. Derek's father, Richard, a man with deep pockets and deeper influence, was in the gallery, his eyes cold and calculating. Ethan knew this wasn't just about him, it was about power, about a city divided, about a world that still struggled to accept people like him. And as he lay on the cot in his cell, staring at the ceiling, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the second day began, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan sat straighter, his hands less shaky, but his heart still raced. James's testimony had cracked something open not just in the jury, but in Ethan himself. Claire Donovan, however, was not one to back down. She strode in, her heels clicking like a metronome, her expression a mask of determination. She'd spent the night preparing, and it showed. Your Honor, she began. The prosecution calls Derek Thompson to the stand. Ethan's stomach dropped. Derek swaggered to the witness box, his broad shoulders filling out a tailored blazer that screamed money. At 19, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew the system was on his side. His buzz cut gleamed under the lights, and his smirk was as sharp as ever. "Mr. Thompson," Claire said, her voice smooth, "can you tell us what happened on the night of June 12th? Derek leaned back, casual, like he was recounting a football game. "I was just walking with my friends, minding our own business, when this kid-a-thon started getting in my face. He was waving that flag, yelling stuff, trying to provoke us. I told him to back off, but he shoved me first. I was just defending myself." Ethan's jaw clenched. Lies. All of it. He wanted to shout, to call Derek out, but Tom's hand on his arm kept him quiet. The jury watched Derek, some nodding, others scribbling. His charm, his easiet was working. Claire pressed further. "So, you're saying Ethan initiated the physical altercation?" "Absolutely," Derek said, his eyes flicking to Ethan with a glint of mockery. "He was looking for a fight. I didn't even want to be there." The words burned, but Ethan kept his gaze steady, refusing to let Derek see him break. Mia, in the gallery, gripped her seat, her knuckles white. James sat beside her, his face unreadable but his fists tight. Tom cross-examined, his voice steady but lacking Claire's polish. "Mr. Thompson, you say Ethan provoked you. Can you explain why multiple witnesses, including one with no connection to Ethan, say you attacked him unprovoked?" Derek shrugged, unfazed. "People see what they want to see. It was chaotic. They're probably just siding with him because of, the whole gay thing." The jury stirred, and Ethan's heart sank. Derek's casual dismissal of his identity, the way he wielded it like a weapon, was a reminder of how easily the truth could be twisted. Claire smiled faintly, sensing the momentum shifting back to her. But Tom wasn't done. "Mr. Thompson, have you ever had issues with other individuals in your neighborhood? Any history of confrontations?" Claire objected, but Judge Ellis overruled. "Answer the question, Mr. Thompson." Derek hesitated, his confidence flickering. "I mean, sure, I've had disagreements. Who hasn't? But nothing serious." Tom pressed, citing a prior incident where Derek had been suspended from school for bullying. It wasn't much, but it planted a seed of doubt. The jury's eyes narrowed, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope. As Derek stepped down, Claire called Richard Thompson, Derek's father. Richard, a 50-year-old real estate mogul with a slick smile and a custom suit, exuded power. His testimony was brief but calculated, painting Derek as a good kid who'd been unfairly targeted. "My son was just in the wrong place at the wrong time," Richard said, his voice smooth as silk. "This Carter boy has a reputation for causing trouble." Ethan's blood boiled. He had no reputation unless you counted being the quiet kid who kept his head down to avoid trouble. But Richard's influence was palpable. The jury seemed to hang on his every word. The day wore on with more witnesses, cops who'd arrived at the scene, a paramedic who'd treated Ethan's injuries. Their testimonies were neutral, sticking to facts. But Claire spun them to her advantage, framing Ethan as reckless, a kid who'd brought this on himself. By the afternoon, Ethan felt the walls closing in. The jury's faces were hard to read, and Claire's closing argument loomed like a storm. But then Tom called an unexpected witness, Mrs. Alvarez, Ethan's high school counselor, a 55-year-old woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Alvarez took the stand, her voice calm but firm. I've known Ethan for 3 years, she said. He's quiet, thoughtful, and one of the most resilient kids I've ever met. He's faced bullying since middle school mostly because of his orientation. He never fought back. Not once. Until that night. Claire tried to discredit her. But Mrs. Alvarez held her ground. Ethan's not perfect. But he's not violent. He's a kid who's been pushed to the edge and still tries to do what's right. The jury listened. And Ethan saw a shift small. But there. As the day ended, he caught James's eye again. His father gave him a nod. A silent promise. I'm here. Outside, the Chicago wind howled. And Ethan, back in his cell, clung to the memory of his father's words. Tomorrow, Claire would deliver her closing argument, and Tom would have his chance to fight back. But Ethan knew the real battle wasn't just for his freedom, it was for his right to exist. Unapologetically, as himself. The third day of the trial dawned gray, with rain streaking the courthouse windows. Ethan felt the weight of the past 2 days pressing on him. But James's testimony had lit a spark of hope. He wasn't alone anymore, not entirely. Claire Donovan stood for her closing argument, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began. This case is simple. Ethan Carter instigated a violent altercation, assaulting Derek Thompson without provocation. He's a troubled young man, angry and reckless, who took his frustrations out on an innocent bystander. Her words were a masterclass in manipulation, painting Ethan as a volatile teen whose lifestyle made him prone to violence. She lingered on the word lifestyle, letting it hang in the air, knowing it would unsettle some jurors. Ethan's hands shook, but he kept his eyes on the jury, willing them to see the truth. Claire continued, her tone almost pitying. We've heard from witnesses, including Derek Thompson, a young man with a bright future, who was simply defending himself. Ethan's story doesn't add up. His own father admitted he wasn't there that night. This is about accountability, not sympathy. The jury nodded, some crossing their arms, others whispering. Ethan's heart sank. Claire's confidence was a force, and she knew how to wield it. Tom stood for his closing argument, adjusting his crooked tie. He lacked Claire's polish, but his sincerity was undeniable. This case isn't about a fight, he said. It's about a young man targeted for being who he is. Ethan Carter didn't go to that parade to cause trouble. He went to celebrate, to feel safe, to be himself. And for that, he was attacked. Tom paced, his voice growing stronger. You've heard from witnesses, unbiased witnesses who saw Derek Thompson strike first. You've heard from Ethan's counselor, who knows his character. And you've heard from his father, a man who admitted his own mistakes but stood here to tell you his son is not a criminal. Ethan's only crime was standing up for himself in a world that keeps trying to knock him down. The jury was quiet, their faces a mix of doubt and contemplation. Tom's words weren't as slick as Claire's, but they carried weight, a raw, human weight. Judge Ellis instructed the jury, her voice calm but firm. You must weigh the evidence, not your personal beliefs. This is about what happened that night, nothing more. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Ethan felt a strange calm. Whatever happened, he'd heard his father's voice, felt his support. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The weight was agonizing. Hours passed, and Ethan sat in the holding cell, tracing cracks in the wall with his eyes. Mia and James waited outside, their presence a quiet anchor. Finally, the bailiff called them back. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, stood. We find the defendant, Ethan Carter, Not guilty on all charges. The room erupted. Mia gasped, hugging James, who let out a shaky breath. Ethan's knees buckled, and Tom steadied him, a rare smile breaking through. Claire's face was a mask of shock, her pen clattering to the table. Judge Ellis banged her gavel. Order. Mr. Carter, you are free to go. Ethan turned to his father, who pulled him into a hug, the first in years. I'm sorry, kid, James whispered. I'm so damn sorry. As they left the courthouse, the rain had stopped, and a faint rainbow arched over Chicago's skyline. Ethan felt lighter, but the weight of the past lingered. He knew this wasn't the end of his fight, not in a world where people like Derek and Claire still held sway. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Ethan shielded his face, but James stepped forward. My son's not a story, he said, his voice firm. He's a person. Leave him be. The crowd parted, and Ethan, James, and Mia walked away, the city humming around them. For the first time, Ethan felt like he could breathe. But he also knew the scars of that night off all the nights before wouldn't fade easily. Freedom tasted like rain-soaked air and the faint hum of Chicago's streets. Ethan walked beside James and Mia, the courthouse fading behind them, but the weight of the trial clung to him. He was free, but the world outside felt just as unforgiving as the one inside. James drove them home in his old pickup truck, the radio off, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city blur past neon signs, towering buildings, and the occasional rainbow flag still fluttering from pride. You okay, kid? James asked, his voice gruff but gentle. Ethan nodded, unsure how to put his feelings into words. Yeah, just tired. Mia, in the back seat, reached forward and squeezed his shoulder. You did it, Ethan. You're tougher than you think. He managed a small smile, but doubt gnawed at him. The verdict had cleared his name, but it didn't erase the memories, the sting of Derek's fist, the venom in Claire's voice, the years of hiding who he was. At home, their small South Side apartment felt both familiar and foreign. The living room smelled of coffee and old wood, with faded photos of Ethan as a kid on the mantel. James hadn't changed much since Ethan's mom left when he was 10. It was just the two of them, navigating a life that never quite fit. James sat on the couch, rubbing his hands together. We need to talk, he said, his voice low. Ethan braced himself, expecting a lecture, but James's eyes were soft. I meant what I said in there. I haven't been the father you needed. I want to fix that. Ethan's throat tightened. Dad, you don't have to. I do. James cut in. I should have been there. Not just for this, but before. When you were figuring things out. I didn't know how to handle it, and I pushed you away. That's on me. Ethan looked down, his hands twisting in his lap. I thought you were ashamed of me. James flinched, like the words were a physical blow. Never. I was scared for you, for what the world would do to you. But that's no excuse. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Always have been. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He nodded, unable to speak, and James reached out, resting a hand on his knee. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a bridge rebuilt. The next few days were quiet but charged. Ethan stayed home, avoiding the news, where his story had become a headline, gay teen acquitted in Pride assault case. Mia brought over pizza, trying to lighten the mood, but Ethan could see the strain in her eyes. She'd been there through it all, and the trial had taken a toll on her too. You know you're my hero, right? Mia said, nudging him as they sat on the floor, a half-eaten pizza between them. Ethan laughed, the sound rusty. I'm no hero. I just survived. Exactly, she said, her blue hair catching the light. That's what heroes do. But the world wasn't done with Ethan. The school. Whispers followed him. Some kids high-fived him, calling him brave. Others glared, muttering slurs under their breath. Derek wasn't there. He'd been expelled after the trial, but his absence didn't erase the tension. Ethan kept his head down, focusing on his classes. But the weight of being that kid pressed on him. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez called him into her office. You holding up? She asked, her eyes kind but searching. Ethan shrugged. Trying to. She handed him a flyer for a local LGBTQ youth group. You don't have to go through this alone, Ethan. There are people who get it. People who'll have your back. He took the flyer, unsure if he'd go. The idea of a room full of strangers made his skin crawl. But the thought of connection off not being the only one stirred something in him. That night, James cooked dinner, a rare occurrence. The spaghetti was overdone, but Ethan didn't care. They ate in silence at first. Then James spoke. I was thinking, maybe we could go to that youth group together. If you want. Ethan stared, fork halfway to his mouth. You'd do that? James nodded. I want to understand. I want to be better. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he wasn't just surviving, was living. But the road ahead was long, and he knew the world wouldn't change overnight. Ethan stood outside the community center, the flyer crumpled in his hand. The building was a squat brick structure in Wicker Park, its windows plastered with rainbow stickers and posters for support groups. James stood beside him, his work boots scuffing the pavement, looking as out of place as Ethan felt. You sure about this, Dad? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James gave a small nod. I'm here, aren't I? Inside, the room was warm, filled with voices and laughter. Teens and young adults milled about, some with piercings and bright hair, others in plain hoodies like Ethan. A facilitator, a 30-year-old non-binary person named Alex with a warm smile and a buzzed head, welcomed them. First time? They asked, handing Ethan a name tag. Ethan nodded, scribbling his name. James hesitated, then wrote his own. They sat in a circle of folding chairs, and Ethan's nerves buzzed. He wasn't used to this being open, being seen. The group shared stories, some light, some heavy. A girl named Lena, 16, talked about coming out to her religious parents. A trans boy named Kai, teen, shared how he'd found a chosen family after being kicked out. Ethan listened, his heart aching and warming at the same time. These were his people, even if he didn't know them yet. When it was his turn, Ethan froze. All eyes were on him, kind but expectant. James gave him a small nod, and Ethan took a breath. I'm Ethan. I'm gay. I got into some trouble at Pride, and it went to trial. I won, but it messed me up. The room was quiet, but not judgmental. Lena reached over and squeezed his hand. You're here now, she said. That's what matters. James spoke next, his voice gruff. I'm James, Ethan's dad. I haven't been great at this supporting him, but I'm trying. I want to get it right. The group nodded, and Alex smiled. That's a big step, James. Welcome. After the meeting, Ethan felt lighter, like he'd shed a layer of armor. He and James walked to the truck in silence. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. At home, Ethan started opening up more. He told James about the bullying, the fear, the small moments of joy like dancing with Mia at Pride before it all went wrong. James listened, really listened, and Ethan saw the guilt in his father's eyes soften into something like resolve. But the world outside their apartment wasn't as kind. News of Ethan's acquittal had spread, and with it came backlash. Online, anonymous accounts called him a liar, a troublemaker. Some even targeted James, accusing him of raising a delinquent. Ethan tried to ignore it, but the hate seeped in, a reminder that acceptance was still a battle. One evening, Mia showed up with a new plan. "We're going to a rally," she said, her eyes bright. "It's for queer youth. Downtown. You in?" Ethan hesitated. The thought of another public event made his stomach churn. But Mia's enthusiasm was infectious. "Okay," he said finally. "But no flags this time." James raised an eyebrow. "You sure you don't want me to come?" Ethan smiled. A real smile. "Maybe next time, Dad." The rally was electric. A sea of color and noise in Millennium Park. Ethan and Mia joined the crowd, chanting for equality, for safety, for love. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like he had to hide. He wasn't just surviving, was fighting. But as the rally ended, Ethan spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Claire Donovan. She wasn't in her prosecutor suit, just jeans and a jacket, but her sharp eyes locked onto his. For a moment, Ethan froze, expecting confrontation. Instead, she gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and turned away. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Ethan didn't know her story, didn't know why she'd pushed so hard against him in court. Maybe she was just doing her job. Maybe she believed the lies. Or maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see the truth. As he and Mia walked home, the city lights glowing around them, Ethan felt a spark of hope. The fight wasn't over, but he wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough for now. Months passed, and Ethan's life settled into a new rhythm. School was still a minefield of whispers and stares. But he had Mia, and now the youth group, a lifeline he hadn't expected. James started coming to meetings when he could, sitting quietly but listening, learning. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was healing, one conversation at a time. Ethan began writing about his experience, first in a journal, then online. He posted anonymously at first, afraid of more backlash, but his words resonated. Other queer kids reached out, sharing their own stories of bullying, of fighting to be seen. Ethan realized his voice mattered, even if it shook. One day, Mrs. Alvarez called him into her office again. "There's a scholarship," she said, sliding a packet across her desk. "For students who've overcome adversity. I think you should apply." Ethan stared at the papers, his heart racing. College had always felt like a distant dream, something for kids with money or perfect grades. But Mrs. Alvarez's belief in him sparked something new. "You think I have a shot?" he asked. "I know you do," she said, her smile firm. That night, Ethan told James about the scholarship. His father's face lit up, a rare grin breaking through. "You're gonna do big things, kid. I can feel it." The application process was grueling: essays, transcripts, letters of recommendation. Ethan poured his heart into the essay, writing about the trial, the flag, the fear, and the father who stood by him when it mattered most. James helped proofread, his rough hands steady as he marked typos with a pencil. As spring approached, Ethan got the news. He'd won the scholarship. Not full, but enough to make college possible. He and James celebrated with takeout from their favorite diner, laughing over greasy burgers and fries. For the first time, Ethan saw a future beyond the South Side, beyond the hate. But not everyone was ready to let the past go. Derek's father, Richard, hadn't forgotten the trial. Ethan heard rumors that Richard was pushing for an appeal, claiming the verdict was biased. It didn't go anywhere, the evidence was too strong, but it reminded Ethan that some battles never truly end. One afternoon, Ethan ran into Derek at a gas station. It was the first time they'd seen each other since the trial. Derek's smirk was gone, replaced by a guarded look. He was alone, pumping gas, his shoulders hunched. Ethan's pulse raced, but he didn't back down. "You got what you wanted," he said, his voice steady. "You tried to ruin me. It didn't work." Derek's eyes flickered, but he didn't respond. He just got in his car and drove off. Ethan stood there, the pump nozzle heavy in his hand, realizing he didn't need Derek's apology. He'd already won. That night, Ethan went to another youth group meeting. He shared his scholarship news, and the room erupted in cheers. Lena hugged him, Kai fist bumped him, and Alex gave him a proud nod. James was there too, sitting in the back, his quiet presence a steady anchor. As the meeting ended, Alex pulled Ethan aside. "You're making a difference, you know. Kids are talking about your story. It's giving them hope." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being seen as anything but a victim or a troublemaker. But maybe, just maybe, he was something more. Back home, Ethan sat on the couch with James, a basketball game on mute in the background. "Dad," he said, hesitating. "Thanks. For everything." James looked at him, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. I'm your dad. It's my job." For the first time, Ethan believed him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he wasn't walking it alone. And that made all the difference. Graduation loomed, and Ethan felt the weight of change. He'd chosen a small liberal arts college in Illinois, close enough to visit James but far enough to start fresh. The scholarship covered most of his tuition, and James had promised to help with the rest, even if it meant extra shifts at the construction site. The youth group became Ethan's second home. He wasn't just a member now, was helping Alex plan events, speaking to new kids who showed up scared and unsure. His story, once a source of shame, was now a beacon for others. He'd even started a blog, no longer anonymous, where he wrote about being queer in a world that didn't always understand. One post went viral, shared by a local LGBTQ organization. It was about the trial, but also about James, about a father learning to love his son, flaws and all. Comments poured in, some hateful, but most supportive. Ethan read them late at night, his phone glowing in the dark, and felt a quiet pride. Mia was heading to art school in New York, and their goodbyes were tearful but hopeful. "You better visit," she said, her blue hair now streaked with purple. "I'm gonna miss my sidekick." "You're the sidekick," Ethan shot back, grinning. They hugged, promising to stay in touch, and Ethan knew they would. Mia was family, blood or not. As summer faded, Ethan packed for college. James helped, folding clothes with a care Ethan hadn't seen before. "You nervous?" James asked, taping up a box. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "But excited too." James nodded. "You're gonna be okay. Better than okay." The day before Ethan left, they went to Boys Town together. It wasn't Pride, just a quiet Saturday. but the neighborhood hummed with life. They stopped at a cafe, and James bought Ethan a coffee, the two of them sitting outside, watching people pass. A rainbow flag fluttered above them, and Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm sorry it took me so long," James said suddenly, his voice low. "To get here. To this." Ethan looked at him, the flag's colors reflecting in his eyes. "You're here now. That's what matters." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need words. Ethan realized he wasn't just leaving home, he was carrying it with him, in the form of his father's love. Hard-won but real. College. Ethan found a new rhythm. His roommate, a quiet kid named Sam who loved comic books, was the first to ask about his blog. "You're that Ethan Carter," Sam said, eyes wide. "Dude, your story's intense." Ethan laughed, a little embarrassed. "It's just my life." But it wasn't just his life. It was a story that rippled outward, touching others. He joined the college's LGBTQ alliance, speaking at events, sharing his truth. He wasn't fearless, but he was learning not to let fear win. One night, he got an email from an unexpected source, Claire Donovan. It was short, formal, but it stopped him cold. "I misjudged your case," she wrote. "I was wrong. I hope you're doing well." Ethan stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was an admission. He didn't reply, but he saved the email, a reminder that even the hardest hearts could shift. As his first semester ended, Ethan went home for the holidays. James had put up a small Christmas tree, a first in years. They cooked dinner together, laughing when the turkey came out dry. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Sitting by the tree, Ethan felt the weight of the past year settle into something new, not just survival, but hope. He wasn't just a kid who'd been knocked down. He was a young man rising, with a father by his side and a future to claim. College was a whirlwind of new faces, late nights, and ideas that made Ethan's head spin. He majored in sociology, drawn to understanding people, systems, the way the world worked and didn't. His blog grew, and with it, his confidence. He wasn't just telling his story anymore. He was helping others tell theirs. Back home, James kept working, but he'd started volunteering at the community center, helping with outreach programs. Ethan teased him about becoming a group dad, but he was proud. James was changing, and so was he. One weekend, Ethan returned to Chicago for a youth group event, a fundraiser for queer teens facing homelessness. He spoke to the crowd, his voice steady, sharing how the group had saved him. James was there, clapping louder than anyone, his eyes shining. Afterward, Lena from the group pulled Ethan aside. "You're kind of a big deal now," she said, grinning. "You gonna forget us when you're famous?" Ethan laughed. "Never. You're stuck with me." But fame wasn't what he wanted. He wanted change. He started working with Alex to expand the youth group, reaching kids in neighborhoods like his own, where being queer could feel like a death sentence. They organized workshops, safe spaces, even a mentorship program. Ethan mentored a 15-year-old named Jamal, who reminded him of himself, scared but fierce, hiding behind a tough exterior. One day, Ethan got a call from Mrs. Alvarez. "There's a conference in D.C., she said, "for young activists. They want you to speak." Ethan's stomach flipped. "Me? I'm just a kid." "You're more than that," she said. "You're a voice." He went, with James and Mia cheering him on from afar. The conference was overwhelming, hundreds of people, big names, bright lights. But when Ethan took the stage, he spoke from the heart, telling his story, the flag, the fight, the trial, the father who learned to love him. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just surviving anymore, was leading. Back at college, Ethan started dating Sam. His roommate introduced him to a guy named Lucas, a 19-year-old art major with a shy smile and a love for old movies. Their first date was awkward spilled coffee, nervous laughter, but it felt right. For the first time, Ethan let himself fall, just a little, without fear. Lucas came to Chicago for spring break, meeting James and Mia. James shook his hand, a little stiff but trying, and Mia declared Lucas approved. They walked through Boys Town together, and when Lucas slipped his hand into Ethan's, Ethan didn't pull away. The world wasn't perfect. Ethan still saw hate online, heard whispers in the halls. But he also saw progress, small, hard one, but real. He and James kept building their relationship, one honest conversation at a time. And every time Ethan spoke, whether to a crowd or a single scared kid, he felt the power of his own voice. One night, lying in his dorm, Ethan thought about the trial. Felt like a lifetime ago, but it had shaped him. He wasn't the scared kid in the defendant's box anymore. He was Ethan Carter's son, friend, advocate, survivor, and he was just getting started. Years later, Ethan stood on a stage in Chicago, the city skyline glittering behind him. He was 22 now, a college graduate, working with a national LGBTQ advocacy group. The youth group he'd helped build had grown, with chapters across Illinois. Tonight, he was speaking at a gala, honoring activists who'd changed lives, including his. He looked out at the crowd, James, graying but proud, sitting with Lucas, who'd become a steady part of Ethan's life. Mia, back from New York, her hair now green. Alex, Lena, Kai, and Jamal, all there, all family. Mrs. Alvarez was in the front row, her smile as warm as ever. When I was 17, Ethan began, his voice clear. I thought the world would break me. I stood in a courtroom, accused of a crime I didn't commit, mocked for who I was. But I'm here because of the people who didn't let me fall, me dad, my friends, my community. He paused, meeting James's eyes. My father taught me that love isn't perfect, but it's real. It's showing up, even when it's hard. And that's what we're here to dose how up for each other, for the kids who feel alone, for the world that still needs to change. The crowd roared, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He stepped off the stage, and James pulled him into a hug. You did good, kid, he said, his voice thick. Later, as they walked through Boys Town, Ethan saw a rainbow flag fluttering in the breeze. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, he smiled, his hand in Lucas's, his father by his side. The trial was a distant memory, but its lessons weren't. Ethan had learned to fight not with fists, but with words, with love, with truth. He'd learned that hate could wound, but it couldn't win, not when people stood together. As the city lights danced around them, Ethan knew he'd keep fighting for himself, for Jamal, for every kid who needed a voice. And he knew he wouldn't be alone. The rainbow flag wasn't just a symbol, Anna Maria, it was a promise, one he'd carry forward, no matter what. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.